This is Scott Spears, WWGH Radio, and as you know, the WGH stands for Warren G. Harding. And with President's Day just around the corner, we have a guest like no other guest. The extent that people will come on this show is quite great. They will sometimes recover from their death to appear on this show. And today, our guest is a former president, a president we hold very high here in Marion because he is one of our own, although there is some ambiguity there which we're going to start out covering. My guest today, I'm very proud to say, is Warren G. Harding. Mr. President, how are you?
I'm wonderful, thank you. Feeling good and flattered, frankly, that this radio station has my initials. That's quite an honor.
Now, President, this where we are here, our little backdrop out our window. Do you like the big city, or were you more at home in Marion?
I'm a small town boy. I was born in a little teeny burg and grew up in a little larger town, Caledonia, and spent most of my adult years in Marion. So yeah, I'm a small town boy, and I'm adjusting to Washington life, but I'm a Marionite at heart.
Now, this is the ambiguity I spoke of. Now, when we say Marion has a president from Marion, it's a little confusing because Blooming Grove is in this picture. Caledonia, there's a home in Caledonia where there's a historical marker that says you live there. Now, where does Marion come in? Were you born in Marion?
No. I was born in Corsica, which later was known as Blooming Grove. You see, the problem was that there were two Corsicas in Ohio, and that didn't make the Postal Service happy. You can't have two Corsicas in the same state. So the post office mandated that our little community change its name. Now, I always thought it should be named Harding Corners because the little village was laid out by my great-grandfather. And there are Hardings in every direction. In fact, if you go to Blooming Grove and visit the cemetery there, you'll see a lot of Hardings that go way back. But Harding Corners didn't make it. So Blooming Grove, it was. And there's only one Blooming Grove.
Now, Blooming Grove versus Caledonia, what do you remember best from your childhood?
Well, we weren't in Blooming Grove for long. I mean, my family was, and older brothers and sisters were. But I was just a young boy when my family moved to Caledonia. See, my father was a physician, and actually my mother was as well. Although she specialized in midwifery. But Caledonia was turning into a booming town in the 1870s, 1880s. I was born in 1865. So as Caledonia started to gain momentum, my father realized that to have a thriving medical practice, Blooming Grove wasn't the place to be. So he moved my family to Caledonia, and there he prospered, really. He had quite a busy and thriving medical practice, and my mother was busy helping families deliver babies. My first job actually was in Caledonia. I got a job for the Caledonia newspaper. It was the Caledonia Argus, and I got a part-time job as a printer's devil, which that's the person who sets type and helps run the press and is a gopher for all the miscellaneous things that need done in a newspaper and printing shop. So that was my first taste of journalism. Like, at that point, I didn't write anything. I just assembled type, and so worked up my hands dirty. But what I remember from childhood, well, Caledonia, as it grew, when I was a young man, the railroad came through town, which was a major, major event. And in fact, I got a little bit of work as a boy on the railroad crews, driving the teams that hauled the stone and pulled the scrapers to help shape the road bed and so forth. And it was miserable and hard work, but rewarding in a way, because the railroad was a major contribution to Caledonia and to Marion and every place else that it went. And I felt I had made something of a contribution by helping build that.
So when we say that you were from Marion, that's not really correct, is it?
Well, what does from Marion mean? Born in Marion? No. Young childhood in Marion? No. But again, as Marion grew and prospered, and again in the 1870s, 1880s, Marion was a boom town. Things were popping in this town. My father saw that, and again thought perhaps he should consider moving his practice to Marion for the same reason he moved to Caledonia. This is a booming town. There are a lot of people moving into Marion, a lot of people with health problems, and so that proved to be a good move.
When you came to Marion, what was it like in those days? You say a boom town. What made it a boom town?
Well, manufacturing was a major set of industries in Marion. Mr. Barnhart had perfected the steam shovel, and the Barnhart Power Shovel Company, later the Marion Power Shovel Company, was a major employer. It drew people into Marion from all around, even from out of state, because of the economic prospects that Marion had to offer. Then there was the Howland Sulky Company was starting to get underway, and it was doing well. We had a brass band instrument company here in town. We had a popcorn company here, a glass company here, and Mr. Huber he had developed his hay rake, and then there were other inventions that came after that. So the Huber enterprise was growing incredibly fast and hiring people as soon as they showed up to Marion. So Marion was the place to be at this time, just because of the sheer growth of the industries in the area.
Now, you becoming a journalist, becoming owner of the Marion Star is an interesting story. Tell us how that all happens.
Well, I got a little taste for journalism as a boy in Caledonia. I started college at age 14, which doesn't make me a childhood genius by any means. It's just that public school ended at about that time. So by the time you were 14, you were done with your public education. And so I went on to college, to Ohio Central, which is in Iberia, and it's a Presbyterian school, but it's also a what's known as a normal school. It's a school where people go to learn to become teachers. So most of my classmates were planning on becoming teachers, and I had considered that. But a friend of mine, Jack Warwick, and I, while we were both attending Ohio Central, started a little newspaper, the Iberia Spectator. Iberia was a small town, but it warranted a newspaper. There was enough going on in town that Jack and I could publish a newspaper periodically. It was done on kind of an irregular basis. We would strive to issue it weekly, but sometimes it was monthly. And that's what started to give me a taste for journalism. Was a bit of a highfalutin word for it at that time. It was basically a community gossip paper. But it gave me a taste for telling stories, meeting with people, understanding what was going on in their lives, writing stories about that. To the point that what I was doing with Jack was veering into journalism. That's when, later as we moved to Marion, my father had his home, and we lived on East Center Street. And we had an opportunity, Jack Warwick and I, to buy the Star. Now, the Star was a floundering paper, really. It had existed for many years as the Marion Pebble. And it was just a little paper. It was that big, a couple pages. And but it changed its name to the Star, and went bankrupt. It had been fledgling for years, and it just couldn't make a go of it. Finally, the paper went bankrupt, and it was going to be sold at a sheriff's sale. So my friend Jack and I gathered some money any way we could. I borrowed some money from my father, and I don't know who he tapped to get some funds, but between us, we were able to pull together several $100s, which was a huge amount. But we thought this Star paper had potential. So it went up for sale at the sheriff's auction, and we were the high bidders. Jack and I bought it for $300, and there launched the Star. I changed the name to the Marion Star to make it clearer where this publication was coming from. And we started operations. My nickname for it was the Sick Kitten, because the financial position of the paper was morbid at best. So we were struggling to make a go of it, struggling to get it out of debt, struggling to build circulation, struggling to turn this publication from a 2-page pamphlet into something that started to look and feel like a respectable newspaper. And my wife Florence joined me in that effort. There's a lot to talk about that, but the Marion Star did increasingly well over the years. We had many years of destitution. I'll tell you about a couple of those. I always paid our Marion Star employees, and we just had a handful, but always paid them in new money. And go to the bank, get new money, and paid them new money, because it just felt better. That money was more tangible. It was crisp. It was. But on payday, when I paid everybody, I also invited all of them into my office upstairs to borrow money from them. So I paid them, but then for those who could afford to do it, loaned me a little bit of money to buy paper, buy ink, do all the things necessary to keep the paper in operation. Yeah, at one point we actually bought a cash register. That was a big step for us. Now, in the cash register drawer, the only thing that was in there was collar buttons. But the cash register gave the impression that we were an enterprise and there was commerce conducted in this place of business, and so that helped a bit with the image of the paper. Now, remember, at that time, you didn't subscribe to a newspaper. If you wanted a copy of the newspaper, you went to the newspaper office and you plunked down 2 cents, later 3 cents, and out you went with a copy. And that's how we did business. Florence had a much better idea. Her idea was, why don't we do papers the way milk is delivered? Let's take it right to people's homes. What a concept. That had never been done before. How would we ever do that? So Florence recruited some young boys. Some of them were really too young to do it, but maybe they were just too young to know better. But she came up with the idea of being able to subscribe to the paper and have a paper boy bring the paper to your front porch, and to do that every day. So rather than selling someone a paper now and then, people who subscribed basically bought the paper every day. And then the newspaper boys would go around and collect the money and bring it back. So that business philosophy radically changed the way we operated. I don't know that we were the first newspaper to do that, but we were among the earliest, and it became a model that other newspapers began to emulate. And it certainly made a difference in our fortunes at the Marion Star.
Now that's part of the story of the Marion Star, is that you were the nice guy, you were the people person, and Florence made the Star work. She was the constructor, she was the finances, she was the bad guy to your good guy.
Well, I wouldn't characterize Florence that way. Florence is an extremely gifted woman in many ways. When you first meet her, she comes across as strong, maybe even stern. But you've got to understand how it was that Florence grew up. That really shaped who Florence became, and it shaped the woman that I would marry. Florence, her father was Amos Kling, and Amos had a hardware store in Marion. Actually, I think it was called Blaine's Hardware at the time. It was a hardware store on South Main Street. It was on the east side of South Main Street. And anyway, Amos worked at Blaine's Hardware and grew through the ranks. And as he got a little better off, he bought the business. And he and Florence lived in an apartment upstairs from the store. And Amos did well as a Marion entrepreneur, but his shrewd move was to sell provisions to the Union Army during the Civil War. The Union Army needed everything, and much of that were provisions and hardware and cooking utensils and things that Amos carried in the store. So he profited from the war and built his business. And as he became as he had more wealth, he began investing in real estate in the Marion area. Was a landlord to many, and that's some commercial real estates and businesses, and lots of homes, residences in town. And Florence grew up in that environment. She worked in the store since she was a young child, stocking the shelves, and she started keeping the records and the receipts, and learned how to keep a ledger and how to track income versus expenses. And so she became, growing up, very astute in business practices. And I didn't have that kind of background. Frankly, I never was particularly good with numbers. Early as a young man, I tried my hand at several different forms of employment in Marion. I was a school teacher for a time. I had been trained to be a school teacher at college, so I accepted a position up at a little bit north of Marion, at the corner of North Main Street and Marion Williamsport Road. It was a white one-room schoolhouse there, and I taught for one season, and clearly realized this is not a job for me. Disciplining a classroom of unruly kids for a pittance of a salary. To be honest with you, it wasn't worth my time to do that. I'm not sure it was worth anybody's time to do that, although teaching is certainly a noble endeavor. It doesn't pay the bills. So I tried my hand at selling insurance, and I had one of my neighbors in Caledonia had a small insurance agency, and so he put me on as an insurance salesman, and that didn't work out. I had the problem of selling insurance policies, but then miscalculating what the premiums were supposed to be, so that when the bills were due, the payment was due, the people I had sold policies to paid far less for their insurance policies than they should have, and the supervisor of the insurance company wasn't fond of that. So it was clear that insurance, or really anything that had to do with finances, would not be my strong suit. I needed that, and Florence brought great skill to the operation of the paper as an organizer, as a recruiter of paper boys, of basically writing herd on the paper boys and collecting the money and disciplining them when necessary. Actually, Florence even spanked some of them sometimes, if needed. But she brought organization and structure and financial stability to the newspaper. Those weren't my gifts.
Now that you are on the national stage, President of the United States, a lot of people look at your marriage in sort of a strange way. The perception is strange because your election, the first election that women had the right to vote in, it is said that one of the reasons, we don't really know, that you won was because you were a handsome man. You were are younger than Florence. She's considered a stern, not a beautiful woman, although beauty's in the eye of the beholder.
Well, Florence isn't beautiful by conventional standards, I suppose, but she's
She better not hear you say that.
Well, but Florence and I have a relationship based on mutual admiration.
That's the thing. What kind of marriage is that? Is it a conventional marriage? It doesn't seem like one. Based on everything I just said, you are considered a friendly, happy, younger, coiffed, handsome man married to this not conventionally beautiful, older, stern woman. It's a weird match.
Well, not really. Florence has the first impression you get from Florence is someone who's stern and cool, and once you get to know Florence, and once you're in her inner circle, you see the real Florence. She's an incredibly warm and caring woman. She has, beyond just the business things that we talked about, she's got some amazing talent. She's some would argue the best horsewoman in Marion County, because she rode horses to collect the rent for her father. So she rode around Marion on horseback to collect rent when she was a teenager. She also was a fabulous markswoman. She could shoot the eye out of a blackbird at 100 yards. I'm impressed by that. I'm impressed by so much that Florence is able to accomplish. She's a very talented woman, as well as musically. In fact, that's how we met.
Oh, tell that story.
Well, Florence, her father wanted her to be successful at piano for several reasons. For one thing, piano and teaching piano was a respectable way for a young woman of the time to earn a living. But beyond that, Florence was, as she studied piano, was very talented at it. She was excellent to the extent that her father sent her to the Music Conservatory of Cincinnati to study piano, which was unheard of for a woman to further her education in that way. But when she came back to Marion, she taught piano, and my sister Charity, Chat we called her, was taking piano lessons from Florence, and that's how I met her.
It's interesting, and one final bit here on Florence is that, and you've heard this, and this was brought out during the campaign to some degree, that without her, there would not have been a successful business, the Marion Star. There would not have been a platform for you to write what we would consider editorials that got your foot into political life and into different circles. Her family was certainly the more wealthy family, well-connected family, that she seemed more suited to deal with higher office in the state of Ohio, which you achieved, go to Washington, and really at that convention, that is a really confusing convention that you came out on top in, that she is the one more suited to make those deals, to push you to do it. Not that you don't want to be president, not that you didn't want to, but that you would have been left up to your own devices with no Florence Harding, been perfectly suited to run the Marion Star for the rest of your days.
Well, Florence had no and has no political aspirations. Now, if you ask Florence, what's your hobby? Florence would tell you, my hobby is my husband. So, Florence has been, for me, a motivator. Florence is well connected. Florence is in tune with the Marion community and the business community of Marion and the needs of Marion, and certainly as I began my journalism career in Marion, she opened my eyes to the strides that Marion would need to make in ahead, and to become a legitimate city. You got to understand that Marion at this time had mud streets. Streets weren't paved, had no sidewalks. There was no water system. Electricity was just beginning to be something that people would consider. Marion had very little infrastructure to justify its claim as an Ohio city. And it was clear to me that as the editor of the Marion Star gave me a mouthpiece in a way that few had in Marion. So by writing editorials, it gave me the opportunity to help Marion set its agenda for growth and for progress. There are any number of things that I lobbied for through editorials, and through editorials began to gather public opinion. And by gathering public opinion, it begins to sway city council members and others holding office to make decisions to help booster Marion. And I think it's safe to say that I have been one of Marion's biggest boosters over the decades. I can't claim credit for any of the progress that Marion has made, but I'd like to think that I set the tone for discussion in Marion, and doing that through editorials stimulated conversation. Got people talking.
I want to come to these editorials in a second, but just a simple yes/no question. In your opinion, could you have become president with a different wife, without Florence Harding?
No, I don't think so. I think because Florence and I are a team. So I need to give Florence due credit for being my greatest supporter. Now, political aspirations didn't come from Florence. She encouraged me, but she's not someone who prodded me to seek office. That came from other directions. But she supported me in every effort.
What directions did they come from?
Well, I'm a Republican. I've been a Republican. I'll always be a Republican. The Marion Star is a Republican newspaper. There is a Democratic newspaper in Marion, the Marion Democratic Mirror. There's another newspaper called the Marion Independent. But the Marion Star is a Republican-oriented newspaper. We support Republican candidates. Our editorials are in support of those running for Republican office. And that caught the eye of party bosses in Ohio. They saw the influence that the Marion Star had on Republican politics in the Marion area. I think they had some respect for that. And gradually, I was encouraged to consider running for office. In a small way, I started with a run for the Marion County Auditor, which was a dismal defeat. I lost to my Democratic opponent, and so I was sure was going to be the end of my political career. I said, okay, we tried that. It didn't work. Let's go back to newspapering. But I was prodded farther and farther and farther. And I ran for U.S. Senator in 1914. Well, I should mention I also had run for governor in Ohio a bit before, but that also ended in defeat. But I gained enough support in running for governor that later I was appointed lieutenant governor. Now, the lieutenant governor at that time wasn't picked by the governor, and the lieutenant governor was appointed by the state legislature. And I had earned enough respect among my colleagues to earn an appointment. In 1914, well, let me back up a bit. In 1912, I was at the Republican National Convention. How I got there, that's another story, and hang on to that. Bring me back to that if I don't think of it. But in 1914, I was a featured speaker at the 1912 Republican National Convention. And again, how I got to be a featured speaker at that convention is even another story. But being a speaker there raised my national profile. I didn't have a national profile before that. I was strictly Marion, Ohio, but the 1914 Republican National Convention gave me a national voice among Republicans. Now that also then gave me some momentum to run for office for Ohio Senator in 1914. And I was able to serve as Ohio's Senator in Washington from 1914 to 1921 when my campaign started. In fact, as president, I am the first sitting senator to be elected to president. That hasn't happened before. But that's a brief chronology of the arc of my political career.
So how did you get to that 1912 convention?
Well, as anybody who knows me knows that speaking, oratory, is one of my strengths. It might be my strongest suit. I learned oratory when I was at Ohio Central. All teachers were schooled in oratory to be able to speak before a class. I became comfortable with that and started to become something of a noted speaker in the area, for giving speeches on every kind of trivial topic you could imagine. But there was something coming up at the time that I was a young man. It was called the Chautauqua movement. It began in a little town of Chautauqua, New York. And the idea behind it was to bring knowledgeable and entertaining speakers to communities throughout the Midwest and beyond. Good entertainment in the era when I was growing up was rare. Theaters were around, and vaudeville houses in some towns. Movies didn't become available until I was really an adult, so that wasn't a major cultural thing yet. And each community had a little opera house, and so. But there was very little in the way of engaging entertainment from someplace else. And the Chautauqua movement really moved that along. So the Chautauqua organizers gathered speakers and presenters who had something to say and were good presenters, good at oratory. And I always enjoyed oratory, and actually my hero was William Jennings Bryan, one of the great orators of the century. And so I, in a weak attempt to mimic him, joined the Chautauqua Circuit, speaking on many different topics. I think the most popular one was a presentation that I had put together on Alexander Hamilton, one of our founding fathers. He's not appreciated. He's not appreciated by history the way he should be. So I did a speech on Alexander Hamilton, and that caught fire. Soon, people in other communities, the people in Mansfield, I'd like to hear this Harding guy talk about Hamilton. So I appeared there on the Chautauqua Circuit, and then I went to Dayton and to Cincinnati, and then I went to Chicago. And then you've got to understand that one of the benefits of being the editor of the Marion Star was that I had free railroad passes. What I had done was traded the railroad company. Railroad companies needed to publish their railroad schedules in the paper. That's advertising. So we're going to charge them for that. But rather than do that, I traded the advertising for the value of railroad passes for Florence and myself. And with those passes, we could travel anywhere in the country at no cost. So that gave me the opportunity to join the Chautauqua Circuit and go to any community that was served by a railroad, and do that at no transportation cost and merely for the cost of a modest speaker's fee. I could be in Chautauqua, New York, I could be in Chicago, I could be in Fort Wayne, and deliver one of any number of presentations that had developed some popularity. So I really owe the Chautauqua Circuit for one thing, honing my presentation skills, but beyond that, making Harding a name that people recognized in areas around the Midwest, somewhat beyond that, but in this part of the country, certainly.
Now let's speed up. You did a little chronology of your early political career. 1920, big year. A lot of stuff going on in this country. A lot of stuff going on here in Ohio, frankly. If people don't remember that your Democratic opponent was also an Ohioan, was also a newspaper man. Very odd that would happen. Also, it was the first election, presidential election, that women had the right to vote in. That was a big deal. Nobody really knew how that was going to go, how many women were going to register, who were they going to choose. There's a lot going on there. What is going on with you from January 1920 through Election Day 1920?
Well, the Republican convention.
Yeah, that's where it all starts.
That's really where it came together, and that convention was a zoo. There were.
I just want to point this out for history. Common wisdom was, and maybe this was a problem with that 1920 convention, wasn't common common wisdom that Theodore Roosevelt was going to make a big return in 1920. He'd made up with the Republicans after the whole Bull Moose thing. He and Taft still had a rocky relationship, but Taft was out of office, so who cared? And that he was going to walk in and get this this nomination hands down. Problem being, he dies. So that kind of put a monkey wrench in that whole plan.
Exactly. The Republican Party laid all its hopes on Teddy Roosevelt. There was no plan B. So when Teddy Roosevelt passed away, the Republican Party was in shambles because there was no heir ascendant to step into a candidacy. So there were dozens of minor voices that were clamoring to be recognized for the nomination. Names like Len Root, really just names now that probably just seem obscure. But nobody rose to the top. And the problem was that everybody who thought they were beginning to emerge as a candidate had heavy baggage. One of the candidates was financed by the Procter & Gamble business empire out of Cincinnati. Well, that candidate was viewed as being tainted with big money. Well, that was a problem. And other candidates had political baggage that they couldn't shake. They had supported an unpopular candidate at some point that just kept haunting them. And in a national convention like that, a candidate has to be selected by a majority plus one. And nobody could earn a majority plus one. Vote after vote after vote after vote, every candidate went down in flames. Now, as I had mentioned before, I had a growing base of Republican support. And fortunately, I had led a campaign and really led a life as a professional journalist as a decent, fair, nice, educated man with a man who cares about humanity, who has backed legislation throughout my career that benefited people, that improved the lot of Ohioans, and as a senator of Americans. And my name came up as, well, why not Harding? And Republican Party leaders began nodding their heads. Why not? Why not? Yeah. Does anybody have any objections? No. Does anybody hate this man? No. Has he committed some crime? No. Well, let's think about it. So there began to be some consensus among party leaders at the convention. Let's float this name and see what happens. And then a vote, and then another vote, and the Harding name starts to gain some traction. And in the 11th vote, now remember in the previous 10, one candidate after another is rising into ascendancy and then doesn't achieve the majority plus one. But as the Harding name grew and there was discussion and consensus among the delegates, lo and behold, I was nominated.
Now, interestingly enough, all those things that you bring up, not a criminal, does anybody not like this man, so on and so forth, very true, and probably led you to the nomination. Now, when we get to the election, and I even hate to bring this up, because on the Democratic side there is some accusations being made, and maybe that's why this is not a bigger issue was not a bigger issue in that election of 1920. But oddly enough, a friend of yours from Marion, Carrie Phillips, word has been sent on a trip around the world, abroad, and that you have been very close with her for a long time, even when your own wife was ill and away, and that there have even some scuttlebutt that your opponent in that election, the other Ohioan, the Democrat Ohioan, did not bring this up because maybe he had some of the same problems. What do you say to the Carrie Phillips question?
Well, that's what people.
She did go abroad, did she not? During the
Of course she
election?
did.
She did, yes.
But you gotta, there's much to know about Carrie and her husband. He was a partner in the Euler Phillips department store in Marion, so was a well-respected businessman. Also was a frequent advertiser in the Marion Star. So over the years, I developed quite a friendship with Jim Phillips and his wife Carrie. And the two of them became close family friends for Florence and myself. And we traveled extensively with them by train. We've traveled the country with them. They were our traveling companions on several transoceanic voyages to Europe. Carrie was enamored with Europe, Germany especially. She had some German ancestry, and when she and Jim and Florence and I were in Europe and visiting Germany, that seemed to light a spark in Carrie.
Is that good for her to be enamored with Germany after World War I here?
Well, that created the Democrats, seeking every opportunity to pounce, viewed that with great suspicion. And never mind that she had family in Germany, never mind that she had visited Germany along with us many times. But because of anti-German sentiments during the war, that was twisted by the Democrats and by any of my opponents into insinuating that she was a German sympathizer. Some even went so far as to charge that she was a German spy. Fabrications came in many directions. And also because Florence and I had such a long-standing friendship as traveling companions with the Phillipses, assumed that there was somehow some impropriety between me and Carrie. Now, it's true that Carrie and I became close, but one of the reasons for that, she had a son, James, that died as a young boy. That was Jim and Carrie's only child. And Jim and Carrie were devastated by the loss of their son. Both of them went into deep depressions. Unfortunately, Jim sought the bottle as an outlet for his depression, which also meant that he was not there for Carrie, who was equally suffering. So Jim went off in his own little world, and Carrie leaned on Florence and I for emotional support.
Now Florence was not well though for a period here,
No,
right?
no.
So now would we say that Carrie maybe leaned more on you? Because this has been a very close relationship.
Well, but it is with Florence as well. Yes, Florence has been ill really much of her adult life. She has had kidney problems since she was an adolescent. Doctors call it a floating kidney. Nephritis is another name for it. And it would flare up and then calm down and flare up and calm down over the years. Dr. Carl Sawyer is the family physician, and he's taken wonderful care of Florence. In fact, Florence credits him as the only man who could keep her alive. And that may be true.
You know, medicine's an interesting, there are a few points I want to make here just to bring the audience up to date before we go to election night, because I want to come to election night. Number one, 1920 was also an interesting year for the Democrats because they had an incumbent president who obviously was not going to run again in Woodrow Wilson. Now, he's very ill at the time of the election, so he's not able to campaign for the Democrat as an incumbent would typically do, correct?
Correct.
Correct. Did that play into your hand?
Well, yes, it did. It was no secret that Woodrow Wilson had a stroke. I think the severity of that stroke was not apparent to the American people. President Wilson was good at keeping up appearances. The reality is his wife Edith was pulling the levers of government at that time because of Woodrow Wilson's incapacitation. Now, because of that, the American political scene had degenerated in a way that made a Republican victory not inevitable, but much more likely. Okay, here's what's going on during the last 4 years of the Wilson presidency. During his presidency, we had this ghastly confluence of war, terrorism, unemployment. During the Great War, that took the lives of 100,000 Americans. We'd been through a global pandemic, the influenza pandemic, Spanish flu of 1918, that here we are in 1922, and we're still feeling the effects of that. There are race riots. There's a race riot in Tulsa not long ago where white militants burned down an entire black neighborhood and threw the bodies of the black people in the river. That was a massacre. We've had labor strike after labor strike after labor strike during the last 4 years. There's been a string of anarchist bombings, including one that killed 30 people on Wall Street. The Russian Revolution has recently happened. There are rumors of communists infiltrating American politics. Unemployment is soaring. We were at full employment during the war because everything had to chug to manufacture all the armaments needed. Now that the war is over, employment's slowing down. Stock prices are also going down. Americans are bitterly divided over whether to join the League of Nations that Woodrow Wilson has been proposing and being a proponent of. And as anybody who's followed my campaign knows, that I am vehemently against the League of Nations. We can talk about what that's all about at another time if you'd like. There even was a cheating scandal involving the American pastime baseball. There was a conspiracy of some gamblers in 1919 to throw the game, which is why the Red Sox now are nicknamed the Black Sox, because nobody knows whether they really won the 1919 World Series legitimately.
Now, during your campaign, true or false, you brought the Chicago Cubs to Marion, Ohio. Now, this really was not allowed or supposed to be done in a presidential election. Is this not true? And you went out there, right, during this game?
Well, yes. Actually, you got to understand that the Chicago Cubs came to Marion during the campaign. Now, there was no impropriety about that. There was nothing in campaign law that prohibited that. But my campaign strategist, Albert Lasker, who brought a lot of the innovations to the Harding campaign, Albert Lasker was a part owner in the Chicago Cubs. And it wasn't a big stretch for him to encourage the Chicago Cubs to come to Marion for an exhibition game during my campaign. Well, that drew a lot of attention on Marion, of course. During the exhibition game here in Marion, it was held up at the Marion Fairgrounds, which was remodeled for a ball field, and there were over 5,000 in attendance that game, filled the stands and standing room all around. Now everyone remembers the Chicago Cubs. Not everybody remembers the Kerrigan Taylors, which was the Marion team. And actually I threw the first 3 pitches. I opened the game, threw the first 3 pitches to Max Flack, who was playing for the Cubs. And the Kerrigan Taylors didn't do that well. They lost 3-1. Everybody knows I'm a baseball fan. I was able to open the 1921 season by throwing the first pitch when the Senators faced the Red Sox. So that was also an honor.
Before we come up and conclude this program on election night 1920, which is where I want to come to here, because this has to be a very exciting night. The other bit of health I wanted to touch on, not just Woodrow Wilson's health, it's a very interesting thing right now. Your father is a doctor, still alive. Your wife is thought to be ill. I mean, she's not well. She's had her health challenges, and Dr. Sawyer is still around and a member of your team, let's say, in the White House. But your health is not great. Now, I know you don't want to be an alarmist to the American people, but here in 1922, you're not feeling your best. True or false?
Well, fortunately, I have Dr. Sawyer to rely on.
Is that good?
Well,
do you? Florence trusts him, but do you?
Oh, yes, of course I do.
Okay.
I've always had trouble with high blood pressure, and Dr. Sawyer has had treatments for that have kept my blood pressure under control. I've had a heart arrhythmia that's part of the blood pressure problem. But all of that said, I'm strong, I feel good, I'm able to keep up my schedule. There have been a few times that I've needed to stop what I'm doing and take a rest. One of my favorite places to do that is Dr. Kellogg's Sanitarium in Battle Creek, Michigan. I have a great deal of respect for Dr. Kellogg. Dr. Kellogg is more of a dietitian. So he works with his patients to purify their diet. He does so with some cereal products that he's developed that purges the intestinal tract of poisons. And there have been times, 3 times actually, during my career, that my nerves have simply gotten the better of me. Anxiety has become an issue, and I needed to take a rest. And I've found great healing in an occasional respite with Dr. Sawyer and his staff in Battle Creek. So I owe Dr. Kellogg in Battle Creek and Dr. Sawyer here in Marion with maintaining my health and keeping me fit and active.
Final question in this interview, because this is a big night. This is a night that happens in Marion. For us in the radio business, this is a big night because it's the first time election results were broadcast and listened to on the radio. I believe KDKA is where they came from in Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh. You're here, you're at the home. How are you feeling that day? Do you think you're going to win? What happens on election day 1920?
Well, actually, I've spent the earlier part of the day in Columbus playing golf. I'm an avid golfer, as anybody who knows me knows. We went down and played at the Scioto Country Club down in Columbus, and came back to an election night party at the home. There were more than 200 cakes that people had baked to bring. The election night was covered by dozens of reporters that were stationed here in Marion, from New York Times and Chicago Sun and really all the major papers around the country.
Now is the Marion Star there getting preferential treatment?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. The Marion Star had a reporter had a front row seat, and we were listening to the election results by radio. That's the first time that had happened. Understanding that radio stations are rare. There's not a radio station in Ohio. Well, there's an experimental radio station at Ohio State, but it's experimental. KDKA in Pittsburgh is an experiment, but it's an experiment run by a corporation. It's run by the Westinghouse Company, and they built a Radio Shack on top of one of their factory buildings in Pittsburgh, and with a 100-watt transmitter, we're able to cover Pennsylvania and most of Ohio with a signal that allowed us to listen in on. We had an Atwater Kent radio at the Harding home, and gave us the opportunity to listen to election results as they were coming in. Understanding that the election results were compiled by the Pittsburgh newspaper, and the radio station simply read the newspaper results. But it gave us an opportunity to follow the election in real time. That had never happened before.
when do you first hear that you're going to be the next president of the United States?
Well, it happened that evening. The results were in. It was a landslide of 60-some% to 30-some%. Won by an overwhelming majority in the Electoral College, so I won the popular vote and also won the electoral vote. Now, some claim that because this was the first election that women could vote, that was it. That was the reason. Women were voting for Harding, and that may be true. It's too soon to know. I think scholars are still studying that to see what are the demographic trends. But I was always a supporter of the women's vote. I had been on record with that all through my political career, especially in the Senate. I supported the amendment as it started to come through the states. And I think women, at least in the Midwest, who had some understanding of what Harding politics was about, were Harding supporters. I can't claim that women threw the election because the landslide, the margin was too great to have been influenced in that way. But it certainly was a factor.
Before we wrap up, and I appreciate the extended time here, President Harding, one interesting fact that gets lost sometimes in your campaign is one of your campaign songs, the probably the most prominent, was done by very popular celebrity Al Jolson. Now, do you recall a line or a bit of that campaign song that our audience can hear as we part ways here?
Well, the song was Harding, Harding, He's Our Man. And I mean, I have not a shred of musical talent any place in my body. That all belongs to Florence. So Harding, Harding, He's Our Man is the one that stands to mind, and that's good enough for me.
That works for me. President Harding, thank you so much for giving us this time. It's a fascinating story from Blooming Grove to the White House, election night, 1920. Thank you so much, and we'll come back and do the presidency in a later date.
Thank you very much. I thank you for the opportunity here, and thank you for being part of this discussion tonight. Thank you.
Scott Spears heading for the dugout.